Welcome to our fifth Collectability podcast. And today it is my great honor to have no other than Aurel Bacs join us live from Geneva in this podcast that I think will answer many questions that are in many collectors' minds. It is such a privilege to have you here. Before we get started, I'd like to give a brief bio, and then we'll get going. So many of you already know Aurel. He is an inspirational watch expert, auctioneer. He is senior consultant to Phillips watch department globally, the department that he and his wife, Livia Russo, founded. He's recognized as one of the greatest living auctioneers, and we'll get into that more later. He's a market maker. And even GQ's Cam Wolf stated in an interview a few years ago, he said, quote, "When Bacs deems something beautiful, many others adjust their vision to see it just as sweetly," end quote. And I think that is a great way to kick things off because your influence, your knowledge, and your amazing ability at the rostrum is unsurpassed. So let's get started. Welcome, Aurel.
Thank you so much, John, for having me. It's an incredible privilege for me to speak to you on your site. Your introduction is, I think, embarrassing to me. I never thought of any of what you just said. So let's maybe put some additional comments to that later. But really, a huge pleasure. So good to speak to you.
Well, today is your chance to set the record straight. It'll be unedited, unabridged, and it'll be all Aurel today. And we are going to ask you some difficult, some fun, and some informative questions. And in advance of getting started, I've had the pleasure of knowing you now since the late 1990s. And I'm embarrassed to say I may have been pronouncing your name wrong all of these years. I've been saying consistently, Aurel Bacs. So please, to begin, how do you pronounce your name?
Oh my God, what a question to start this with, John. I have to say you're doing pretty good compared to what else I had to endure over my 25 years living outside from my hometown, Zurich in Switzerland. So I have the privilege or the burden of having a Latin first name, a Hungarian last name, and having been exposed to people pronouncing my name in Zurich in the sort of German pronunciation. So if you really ask me now, well, how did your teachers or your school friends call you? That pronunciation would be Aurel Bacs. Now, that's far from what you and anybody else has ever heard. It all started in 1995 when I moved to Geneva. Geneva's French-speaking, but working back then at Sotheby's, very Anglo-Saxon, where most of my colleagues were either British or American. And the first thing is they heard how the French would pronounce my name, and that is Aurel. My name exists in French. But then the Americans would translate the Aurel into something that reminds me more of that electric toothbrush, Oral. Well, it is what it is. And my last name, because the CS in Hungarian is pronounced like ch, as in chewing, with a long, light A. And then it got Bacs, Bach, like the composer. And at one point, I just gave up. So everybody's forgiven because I even started to introduce myself in an incorrect way, just to not embarrass people or make things complicated. But I think I'm in good company because if you think of Patek Philippe or Audemar's PK, like the Brazilian race driver, I've heard it all. And that's, well, part of the globalized world, I guess.
That is fantastic. But I have to admit, I knew how to spell your name before I could correctly pronounce it. And I want to take you back to the late 1990s, one of the first times I met you, because we were both at Sotheby's at the time. I recall you were reaching out ahead of a sale to a very important VIP client. It was the first time that you spoke to this client. And you called him, you introduced yourself. He was on speakerphone. I'll never forget this. And you said, "This is Aurel Bacs, and it's a pleasure to meet you." And then you identified how to spell your last name. You said it's B as in bad, A as in apple, CS, as in Caesar salad. And I remember looking at you and saying, this gentleman is unlike anyone I've ever met in the past. Do you remember that by any chance?
Absolutely. At Apple Caesar salad is a few friends are joking about it. I didn't want to say Bravo, Alpha, Charlie. I'm not Top Gun or something. So yes, I do remember very well. I remember the client too.
Oh, that is fantastic. Well, you are no bad apple, quite the opposite. And let's dive into this discussion. I would actually say you are the closest thing to our industry's philosopher that I know. It's beyond your watch expertise. Your insight and commentary is simply superlative. So here's the opening question. How would you describe the current state of this insane watch market?
It's interesting. I'd like to ask you, why do you call it insane? Yes, of course, it's sort of like when you prepare pasta, the water is bubbling, but it's still, to me, making perfect sense if I look a little outside of our little watch garden, behind the fence, when you look at the art market in general, contemporary art in particular, motor cars, and then when you look at the global markets in a broader context. Recently, I spoke to one of the world leading economic minds that he has a Wikipedia page, so he's a very well-known figure. And he explained to me, and now I'm really embarrassed if I get the numbers wrong, that apparently a third of all US dollars that are today out there, that basically have been issued, did not exist pre-2008, when we've had the Lehman and Madoff and so forth, and we had to bail out countries and nations and economies, and now, of course, with the pandemic again. So do we have so much more goods out there, art, watches, and real estate? And if you look, watches, though, are performing really well. I recently was studying with my colleagues in the contemporary art department the market. Well, in 15 years, a great basket would perform times 20. Well, not even the craziest Nautilus and Paul Newman did that. Let's face it. So is it amazing? Yes. Is it insane? I'd like to probably disagree with you.
I think that's very fair. It's just looking at auction results and hearing prices that watchers are trading for. It's emotional. It seems emotional on the buying side, and I personally react to it when I hear some of these prices. Do you think we'll get into the future more, but is it sustainable?
Well, going back to what this professor quoted, but it's not him who said it. I could be even a chairman of a Fed or some other incredible investor who said it. The markets are like a junkie, and the drug is the zero or even negative interest policy. You just keep on giving. We all know how it's going to end. I don't know when it's going to end, in 1 year, in 10 years. I'd be rather concerned on a much bigger scale than for the watch market. Is it sustainable? I think it is sustainable. And I'm now going back way more than 20 years when I had arguments with colleagues, no, actually I should say executives at two of my previous auction house stints, where I said, I don't understand why a painting can be $1 million and a watch cannot. And that was before I sold the first time myself from the rostrum, I think in 99 or 2000, a watch for $1 million. And they said, yeah, but wait a second. He or she is famous. What is a watch? I'm like, excuse me. I mean, you're looking at some oil on canvas done maybe by a talented Picasso or Basquiat in half an hour. On some of the grand complications, watchmakers work months or years. It's not the gold value, but, well, that's not art. I'm like, excuse me, watches are an art form. Like a 250 Ferrari GTO to me is art. Like architecture is art. People can live in the house, but it's art. And art is priceless, and art is worth what someone to who loves it thinks it's worth, what he or she is willing to pay for. Now, I'm really delighted that the community has come an extraordinarily long way. I think part of this growth is down to the globalization. When I started, we had maybe 5 to 10 nations, maybe 50 to 100 people between written, and by written I mean absentee bits that people sent in either by fax or by mail with a stamp on the envelope, to most recently in Geneva, 3,000 people from 80 countries. We had countries this season participating that I could wholeheartedly say back in the 90s, I never thought they would have interest in Patek Philippe, F.P. Journe, Richard Mille, or anything else.
I recall in an interview, and I'm paraphrasing, you once said, when asked, what is a watch worth? You said it's worth exactly what a bidder and underbidder say it's worth. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, first of all, I still today would sign off on that quote. So basically in the auction process, and that's what I've been doing for pretty much all of my professional life, you offer something at a reasonable starting price. And by reasonable, I mean if something is worth 10, I'd like to put a starting offer of 5, 6, maximum 7 on it. People don't like my estimates. I'm more conservative than some fellow colleagues, competitors at other firms. But I think wholeheartedly it should be the bidders, the market to decide, and not the seller with a ambitious, greedy estimate. And when you start at 6 for something that we know is worth 10, as in that's where the most recent transactions have happened, it's tens, maybe dozens of collectors who bid it up until 80, 90% drop out. And at one point, there's always the last 2 guys, the final buyer, the winner, and the underbidder. And they may take it another 5 or 10 bids higher than where the crowd dropped out. They may also just be 1 bid above. And that's what it's worth in that moment, that specific watch. I fully agree. It makes no sense if you have a factory sealed 5711 that on Monday at one auction house achieves 100,000 and the following day at another auction house makes 130. Because it didn't increase in value overnight by 30%, if they're really likes for likes. So there, I hope there's efficiency in the market, that we all know what a Pepsi GMT or a 5711 are worth. If, on the other hand, you've got a unique piece, and it doesn't have to be a Andrew Gray super complication, it can be just a charming, special reference 96 that has its unique patina, maybe a bit of a special dial design. Is it 10, 20, or 50, or 100,000? And that's down to the bidders, and especially the last 2 bidders.
And I think this leads to an interesting segue and discussion about what the world was like, the watch world was like in the pre-digital age, which frankly wasn't that long ago. And it was really when your formative years in the auction world at Sotheby's began. You witnessed a revolution in the world of collecting. And this was the last few years where digital wasn't defining everything that we were doing. What did you learn during those years, 1995 to 2000? You're
absolutely right. It was the pre-computer years, if I may say so. I remember when one day someone walked into my office and say, "We're now giving you email." I'm like, "What's that?" "Well, you can send a message to someone instantly." "Excuse me?" So I remember the first email. It was I think it had a black screen with those green dotted letters that were blinking, and the cursor was underneath blinking. And it was an amazing revolution. I said, well, can I maybe one day send pictures to a colleague in the New York office? That would be great to discuss estimates. Well, yeah, I should have rather brought that idea up to Steve Jobs back then. I would have maybe been more profitable. But I think there was no website, if I'm not mistaken. There was no online catalogs, yet online bidding, no social media. So what I learned, and I'm still very fond of that experience, and I'm still today thinking that this is much the essence of what we do. First, we are in a people industry. I don't think we're in an industry, actually. The word industry is more sort of like manufacturing, but I know what it means. And the most important contacts are today still face to face. Phone calls are a good replacement, but you can't even see the facial expression of the person to whom you're talking. Yet email, yet text, yet I don't know what else form of communication we have today. Second, the watch. You could not discuss a watch, catalog a watch, research a watch if the watch wasn't in your hands. Today, and I really hope that I'm not screwing up right now here with my political incorrectness, I think you can take the thousands of experts out there in the digital space and just cut half of them and, put them aside, because they comment on images they see on the net, may have that sort of fingerprinty, archivy memory and say, well, there's a hash and here's a this. But I still believe you need to see, touch, handle, in some instances even smell a watch. And I mean really smell a watch, because you know what a watch smells when you open a pocket watch that is 100 years old, that smell of old oil, or even a leather strap. And that experience is irreplaceable. Otherwise, every prison inmate can just study horology online and say, I'm a watch specialist. I think it takes more. So these were the most important years. I learned, of course, everything, talking to the greatest pocket watch collectors, going from Renaissance to enamels to the first key wound to the keyless watches, the sounds of repeaters, not the recorded sounds, the sounds of a repeater in your hand, to, well, I must say, learning how to work, discipline, late nights in the office. These were extraordinary years, and I don't know if Darren will listen to this podcast, but Darren taught me everything that was needed to get a start in this industry, and especially how to work, because I was a really lazy guy until that point in my life.
Do you remember Darren and her paper archives, cutting catalogs and having them glued to those pieces of cardboard, and comparing and contrasting like pages of 2523s, for example? I think you had those in Geneva too, didn't you?
I definitely remember that. So when I started the first month, that was in the summer of 1995, I spent in New York. I think I had the most amazing summer of my life, because I was working from 9 till 7 every day at 72nd and York, I believe. And then from 7 till 9, I went out with friends, and sometimes I just got home in the morning, took a shower, and went back to work. It was for me the high life in New York. And yes, Darren had that boss. Then I was moved immediately later for a month to London, where I worked with Tina Miller, and Michael Turner. And they also had this huge archive where they cut out from duplicate auction catalogs across all firms watches and glued them on those cards, Earnshaw pocket chronometers to Earnshaw pocket chronometers, jump humpbacks to jump humpbacks, wristwatches, and so forth, enamels. And then if you had to look up, well, what is something so rare worth? You went to your archive and you saw, oh, the last one did $6,000. So should we say 5 to 7 on this one? That was basically the manual database Google of the time.
I'll never forget those archives. They're so preciously valuable.
I wonder what has happened to them and who kept them or who did not keep them.
That's a good question. I think we're going to have to ask. And I hope all the houses still have their paper archives. So in 2000, you left Sotheby's and joined Simone Dupuy, who unexpectedly merged with Phillips. And this resulted in your first tour of duty with Phillips. I remember seeing your first Phillips auction catalogs from this era. They were not only massive tomes, but they were unlike anything the watch auction world ever saw before. So can you care to comment on that period of time at Phillips and your early experiences with the house.
With great pleasure. So after 5 years, I really started to feel the burden, and I think every auction house expert listening in will say, yeah, I know what he's talking about. The constant pressure to find the next cover lots, the constant pressure to meet deadlines. This has to go to press. You have to do this. You have to do that. Here's a tour. And at one point, I think I said to myself, why sell 500 watches for $1 million when you can do 5 private treaties for $1 million as well? Less is more. Focus on the most interesting watches, the most interesting collectors. And Simon Dupree said, sounds great. Join me. And little did I know that months later at the end of year sort of team dinner, he said, I have great news to announce. We just signed this afternoon in Paris with Bernard Arnault, a merger between Phillips and our Dupree in Luxembourg art brokerage firm. Okay, what does that mean? Well, you're now, and he points at one colleague, the head of jewelry, you're the head of contemporary art, and Aurel and Livia, you're the head of watches. Like, what? I just left the market-leading auction house to not do auctions, and now I have to go back. And, we went back because the outlook and the support that we were promised to receive from LVMH, and they kept every promise, was we're going to make sure you don't lose 5 years of your life to get to there where you were last, but you get you there within a year. And one of the promises was we're going to make the most beautiful auction catalogs. So back then at Phillips, there were no business managers or business directors. Nobody would count the lots per page. Nobody would argue with you about the weight of the paper. Nobody would even ask questions when we chose to have a 5th color with a metallic background. And then you may remember the certificates were these chalk, that transparent paper in between the pages.
That was nice.
And that it was oversized format. And I don't know how many we printed. So there were no questions asked. We were tasked to become the gold standard in watch auction industry. And that was absolutely amazing. We attracted incredible consignments, amazing watches that I've never handled before in my career. I believe it was either in the first or second auction that we broke a brand new world record for the highest price ever achieved for any wristwatch. I'm sure you remember the unique Yellow Goat 1591 reference by Patek Philippe.
Oh, yes.
It's a sort of like a 1463 Testi Tondi-like case, Tauber case with screwback, 12 SC indirect center seconds, full Arabic numeral dial. Later we found out it was originally sold to Marechal Tito. Now it's in a private museum. And at the humble age of 29, I think, $3 million later, we had a world record there. And that was just, from there we went.
And in those years, up until 2003, I just remember record after record breaking every sale. And a lot of people have forgotten that today. But those early years at the turn of the millennium were so exciting in the watch world. But something unexpected happened. You left Phillips in 2003. You joined a auction house, which we could name, which is Christie's, which is doing less than 10 million annually in global turnover with watches. But by the time you left in 2013, they were doing over 126 million per year. What happened during those 10 years?
I think a lot of things happened. To me, this is when the international watch collector community, both in the auction world, but also the trade shows, really came together and grew together. It was those years where, especially auction houses, started to understand the full power of communicating with clients. I think it was that time when the first newsletter was sent out by an auction house, when catalogs became available online, when you could follow auctions online. It was when the press started to cover auctions. Until then, I think in the 90s, Christian Pfeiffer-Belly, you may remember him,
yes.
Dear friend, elder statesman, German journalist covering collectible watches. It became mainstream to comment on vintage watches, to talk vintage watches. It's also when the manufacturers realized, hey, if we cannot stand behind our past, our heritage, publish books, open museums, issue certificates, service antique watches or vintage watches, then how can we be credible selling modern watches for 10, 50, 100 or hundreds of thousands? So everything came together. It's kind of like, when you have these TV shows with the chef that cooks something in your sort of 11 a.m. studio, they always start with all the ingredients laid out, the egg, the wheat, the sugar, the salt. It all looks beautiful. And then he just mixes it all together and makes either a dough or a great dish. And it's like the ingredients were lying in front of us, and somehow the community mixed it all together and made more out of it than the value of the individual components.
Just looking at your experiences in the auction world up until this date, I've never thought of this before, but it's just fact. You always were at the market leader. In the 90s, Sotheby's was number one with watches. Then round one at Phillips. Phillips just topped off the market. Christie's, you built the top of the market. And then now, I think for everyone who knows, you left Christie's in 2013 seemingly at the height of your horological power. And you very surprisingly resigned and disappeared from the auction world. I remember being in complete shock when this happened, by the way, because I was with you at Christie's. And in 2014, you rejoined Phillips as senior consultant, one of the most humble titles, I might add. And now here you are at Phillips, the market leader, sale after sale. You continue to make history, record after record. Number one, how do you do it? And number two, how do you handle the stress of being number one?
Wow, you've asked me all the important questions that had gone through my brain the last 25 years. So first, let me just say, whenever I joined the team wasn't market leader. I always joined the underdogs. And yes, from 95, when we were the underdogs, Christie's and Antiquorum just kind of, beat the out of us. In 2000, we were market leader. Phillips was a unique situation because back then we've had the privilege to sell incredible treasures from one of the finest wristwatch collections ever formed in the history by a very distinguished European collector. Then Christie's actually hired me because they were in somewhat a challenging situation. So without now saying, oh, how great, what an achievement, I think what worked well throughout those years is that I think I never really changed in view, like how I viewed watches, how I viewed quality, how I viewed my approach to do business. Back at home, we were really taught, and I've had reasonably severe parents, integrity, hard work, professionalism, humbleness. And I think I was just always me, as in probably borderline politically correct. If I don't like something, I say it. If I love it, you can tell from my face expression. I live and breathe watches. It wasn't a corporate thing. It wasn't a bottom line exercise. It's just the way I am. And that brings me to the real point. Trust is everything we have in this industry. We don't have any patents like pharmaceutical companies. We don't have machines that ensure that there's a production while we sleep. So we all in the auction and the art and the collector's market have is the trust that we have to work daily, very hard for. We can build it for 10 or 20 years and ruin it in a day. And, well, thankfully, many clients followed from one place to another. The press followed, the manufacturers followed. So I was just continuously able to building knowledge, building relationships. There was no secret recipe or magic stick. It was just very natural.
And one thing that really strikes me about what you're doing with Phillips now in particular is really propping up junior specialists, other senior specialists, and really developing the team, everyone else's reputations and expertise. So can you just discuss just over the years, what have you learned about teamwork in building these market-leading teams?
It's a beautiful question. And when I started in the auction industry, not so much in the watch department, to be honest, but I've seen it, how the London team was competing with the New York team, how the Hong Kong team would go and visit a client behind the back of the Geneva team. I've seen it all. And I always wonder, well, can't they just work together? There must be efficiencies that you don't go across the planet to visit a client, send your colleague. But of course, you need to trust your team. Then I really believe when Jean-Claude Biver entered my life, and we all know what an incredible character, visionary leader he is, he was instrumental when I started playing with the idea of leaving Christie's. The moment you said you were in shock, we could go to him for dinner, Livy and I, and just say, what do you think will happen? And do you think it's crazy or dangerous or stupid? And he said, well, what's your plan? I said, we don't have a plan. We just want a break. We want to spend more time with our back then 7-year-old daughter. Both Livy and I were traveling half the year around the world. And amongst the many things he said is, for example, idiots hire idiots, because if they would hire intelligent people, they would know that sooner or later they would be overtaken by their own subordinates and colleagues and be made redundant. Intelligent people try to hire even more intelligent people, so they have a debate, they can learn from each other. Yes, there is a risk that they take they take over, catch up one day and take over. But if you cannot be better than them, even though they're more intelligent and fast learners, well, you simply don't deserve your job. And if you don't deserve your job, then why try hold on to it? And it really kind of struck me, not that I was ever interested in hiring idiots or yaysayers, but today I'm much more serene, hiring, training, sharing knowledge. Sharing knowledge. Do you know how many, you must have seen it, where senior colleagues whisper on the phone to a VIP collector because they don't want the rest of the office to know, because who knows who could one day stab them or something. I'm always taking junior colleagues to my VIP client meetings. I've got once or twice burnt in my life when I got backstabbed later, but it's worth it. The rewards you get from the next generation learning, wanting to learn, accelerating, is priceless. So teamwork is today the most satisfying thing I have in my entire career. Not that I want to now diminish the value of my friendships with clients and the watches, but to have a totally transparent relationship with your team, share your knowledge, it's priceless.
I truly hope there are others in the auction world that are listening to this, because the next generation of specialists and auction industry insiders, they need to know this. It's so important for the direction we're going. And you and I have discussed auction house politics privately in the past, and that could be a whole episode in itself. And as a former colleague and frankly a former competitor, please share a few words about the good, the bad, and the ugly of the auction world. You've seen it all.
Nice that you quote the movie title. The good. Think of the following: you are, and I think especially to the people, to the folks listening to this. Imagine how lucky John and I were when the favorite things we do is talk watches. Now imagine the favorite thing for you is to play tennis or to eat chocolate or to play video games. On top of that, not only can you do that 24/7 in the auction industry or in the watch industry, but on top of that, you even get paid. And the plane tickets are paid and the restaurants are paid. No, I'm kidding. It's not that we're on holidays, but we are particularly fortunate. So when you ask me what's the good about it is, I met the most beautiful, interesting people, leaders of countries, executives of top Dow corporations, Hollywood celebrities, Wimbledon winners, Formula One drivers. I met my wife, excuse me, thanks to the auction industry. And today, many very good friends. I have met them through watches. Even if they stopped collecting, the friendship remained, because I think somehow deep inside, whether you're an art collector, car collector, a wine connoisseur, or a watch collector, there is a gene inside you that helps you bond so much easier. You all have that extra little twist in your DNA, good or bad. And I think the relationships I was able to build thanks to my career is the friendships is the most beautiful part. What was the second one?
The bad.
The bad. If you are as passionate as you, John, and I are, and many watch collectors, well, the watch collectors actually, they have a normal life Monday to Friday, whether they work as banks or doctors or lawyers or anything else. If your hobby and your passion is your job, you never really know where to stop. Is a dinner with a client now a dinner with a friend or a business dinner? And reading at midnight a watch book, is that reading before falling asleep or is it work? And there were times, and one of the reasons why I think I also left some of the previous jobs is, in the end, it was a 24/7, and there was no more separation between private and business. Everything became kind of like an addict. My life was taken over by watches. And sometimes I needed a break and needed to just, make a step back and take a breath and reassess where I want to really head in my life.
Well said. I felt the same way for sure. So you're
I'm sure you know what I'm talking about.
And last, the ugly. Is there an ugly part of this?
Well, not sure if I want to call it ugly, but they're definitely unpleasant and unhealthy and annoying parts. Absolutely. Well, I don't want to now kind of discourage anyone to enter this world, but especially, when a great watch was $500, $1,000, I mean, please go back to look at auction catalogs when a 1518 was $5,000 in 1979, or a Paul Newman was $250. Then it was like collecting Pokemon cards. I hear they're also worth a lot of money now, but it was much more innocent. The minute you're in a market where real money is at play, well, whether it's real estate, the stock market, politics, well, you've got jealousy. You get some really nasty attacks because nobody's going out there to badmouth you or a watch because they can make $50. But when sort of an attack can eventually bring you $50,000 or $250,000, I've seen some ruthless attacks that are sometimes very, very painful. The watch market, but I guess it's the same in Hollywood, the same in politics, loves gossiping. Oh my goodness. The gossip I have to hear day in and out, and sometimes about myself, is ridiculous. Now, when I hear he did that deal with that guy for that amount, well, it's third-party hearsay, and I just ignore it. When you hear gossip about yourself, that is just totally untrue. You're like, excuse me, don't you guys have better things to do? I mean, recently I heard, well, actually, it's a rumor that I hear now for several years. I think it started in 2017 or 18. Aurel is leaving Phillips. I'm like, excuse me, I just started. I'm not going to quit halfway into this project. I heard it in 19 and 20. Oh, he had a 5-year contract. He's leaving. Like, no. Now it's 21. I just heard it last week again. I can only say to those who have heard that rumor. Aurel is happier than ever before in his career and is not going anywhere because I didn't come that far to build the most beautiful watch team in the world to then go gardening or what? Start another auction house? No way, Jose. So I don't like the gossip. Very unpleasant to me, unfounded personal attacks on social media. The social media troll industry is something I really don't like. Thankfully, I'm not on social media. When my 15-and-a-half-year-old daughter comes to me and says, Daddy, why is that guy on Instagram saying that you are a asterisk, asterisk, asterisk? This hurts. And this is not why we're here celebrating fine watchmaking, celebrating the geniuses, not just since Abraham Louis Breguet, but since the Renaissance, and celebrating today's geniuses making new marvels. What is all this about? Can we just be one big happy family? So some parts are unpleasant. Ugly is probably a bit harsh.
And I think I'm glad you segued into social media, because the fact that you have no social media presence is incredible to me. And other than Brad Pitt, I can't think of another public figure that so purposefully
I didn't know
media.
Brad Pitt. I didn't know Brad Pitt wasn't on social media, but hi, Brad. Kudos to you. Let's connect.
I'm sure he's listening. No doubt.
An exchange experience. I'm sure. By the way, gossiping. He was said to have been buying what was it?
The JB Champion.
The JB Champion?
Yeah,
maybe as a gift. Yeah, like, hello, gossip. I think you both and we both know it wasn't true. How do people come up with that? It's unbelievable. So anyway, we're talking about social media. Yes, I'm not on it. Yes. Why is the question, I guess?
Yes. Like, why are you not on social media, and will you be active in it in the future?
So, Phillips is, of course, on social media. And our team first it was Paul Butchos who said, hey, Aurel, I think we need for Phillips watches an Instagram account. I'm like, what's that? Seriously, I said, what's that? And he had to explain it to me, and I said, sure, go for it. So he started it. At one point, it became so much that I said, I can't do my day job anymore. And then Arthur Tushaw joined us. He's brought a whole new level of facets and features to our social media presence. So here's a hello to Arthur. Amazing job. Because professionally, I completely understand we need to tell the community what we're doing, why we're doing it, what not to miss, what to read, editorials, features, videos, auction previews. Sure, that's a no-brainer.
I was pleasantly surprised to see your new show, we'll call it, on YouTube, Bacs to Basics, as it's called, where you're really offering unfiltered thoughts and views and collecting and only the way that you can, based on your personal experiences. And how did this come to be, and what do you make of this new initiative?
I think it was Arthur's idea, first and foremost, because of the incredible amount of watches at $1 million, $2 million, $3 million, $5 million, up to $18 million that Phillips sold. We often wrongly are associated with, if you're not on the Forbes list, the Rich 500 list, don't bother going to Phillips. That's wrong. First, we love everything that makes tic-tac. We enjoy $500 watches as much as $5 or $50 or $500,000 watches. And I personally am the best example, because don't think that Aurel Bacs is walking around with a $24.99 and pink gold on his wrist. I can enjoy anything if it's well made, well preserved, meaningful. It gives me a smile when I look at it. And Arthur said, I think we can make a very fun series, letting people realize that we are not the guys sitting on the golden tower, that we're basically the cool buddies next door. And we are, by the way, really, I mean, we are as casual as we appear, that we talk. We're buddies to anyone in the watch industry. And I said, yeah, sure. And then I think the idea with the kitchen table came up, and I just went to my box and took out speedies, memo boxes, Eternals. There's a lot to come. It's a fun series. Thanks for bringing it up.
We can't wait to see more. Well done. It's a ton of fun.
Going back to social media, if I may, I don't personally need to tell the world how big the steak is that I have for dinner. I don't need to see the world to see if I sit in the first row in a baseball match. I don't need the world to know that I might sit in the first row of an aircraft and sip champagne. I don't have that desire to tell the world what I'm doing when, in fact, I don't want to do it in front of everyone. So that's as simple as that. I share those precious moments at home, on the weekend, on holidays with my loved ones, my closest friends. And I may tell you, John, and say, look, this is when we were last week on a beach. But I don't need 10,000 people to know, whom I probably don't even know personally.
Watching you take an auction is a masterclass in the art of auctioneering. Take, for example, the Paul Newman auction, which is now gone viral on YouTube. That, I don't want to call it a performance because you're literally acting and reacting in front of a group of people, but an auction is an art form. How did you learn this art, and can you share some secrets from the rostrum?
Auctioneering is not a science. There is no book with formulas. Probably like cooking. You can cook basic dishes, but then there are those who are the Michelin-starred chefs, and they just have that je ne sais quoi, that magic touch. I don't think there is a single auctioneer who has a magic touch or who is better or worse than another one. For every object and for every audience, there are better or not so suited auctioneers. I've had incredible luck to watch from 1995 onwards auctioneers. Back then, there was Simon Dupuy, chairman of Sotheby's, with whom later again at Phillips I worked. But I've seen all different types, ladies, men, younger, elder, formal, casual, sometimes more seductive, sometimes more, I don't want to say brutal or violent, but doing it by sheer force. And everyone develops their own style. I think the best auctioneer is the one who is authentic. The audience needs to know this is not just a great actor. A good auctioneer needs to know what he or she is selling. You need to know the audience, meaning you need to know where to look in the room. And how do I know that? Because I've been spending with every bidder in the room a moment in the preview saying, so what do you like in the auction? Oh, you came for that chronograph or for that repeater. So that when you are at the high estimate, before bringing the gavel down, you go to the 17th row, 4th seat from the right, and there sits the man who played with the repeater for 10 minutes and recorded the sound. He came for that watch, so give him a chance to consider. More difficult, of course, online, when you have people, you don't know where they are, who they are, where they come from. So it's a mix of everything. Of course, after doing it for 20 plus years, you get more and more comfortable with yourself, with the watches, with the audience. But every auction is a new challenge, no doubt.
One of my pet peeves, and now I'm distant enough from the auction world, I think I could say this, are auctions that feature auctioneers that are not from the department, or not, they know nothing about the watch world, and they're just selling widgets. It's so much more enjoyable seeing a specialist who's engaging, knows the people in the audience, knows the watches that they're selling. And those subtle nuances bring the auction to life. And frankly, it makes a difference between an auction I'd like to sleep through compared to an auction I want to participate in.
Well, I completely agree. And this is why I said Aurel would not garner any compliments if you would put me up for a Japanese works of art auction or a Persian rug auction. I know nothing. Yes, you can learn it and read the auctioneer's book for half an hour before the auction and memorize how to pronounce names. but it's not you. It's not authentic, which is why it gives me so immense pleasure that, and you spoke before about the next generation, we've had during the pandemic the idea, the plan to spend time from lockdown and do auctioneering lessons with anyone who wanted to become an auctioneer. And guess what? We had Tiffany Toe, Marcello DeMarco, Clara Kessie, 3 completely different personalities, all love watches, all love auctions, all have had exposure to clients. And as far as I'm concerned, they had their premiere in November and now in May. They have done brilliantly, despite their tender age, forgive me for saying that. They're not 20 plus years of experience, but because they're authentic, and that's what matters.
Just seeing Marcello's sparkle in his eye during the last auction, he was just so excited to be up there. And same with Clara and Tiffany. I love seeing another generation coming from the watch world of auctioneers. And of course, you have Thomas, who's a seasoned auctioneer too. It's such a pleasure to see Phillips diversifying. When they have you as an auctioneer, it'd be very easy just to make you sell every lot. But you have a whole crop of auctioneers presenting all of the pieces.
Absolutely. And you know what? Sometimes I wonder how bad must the consignor feel, or even the specialist, because the specialist is putting so much of their sweat and blood into cataloging, photographing, researching, footnoting a watch, traveling with the watch. And then they're sending over from London or New York someone who might be brilliant as an art auctioneer, who just goes, lot 1, a Rolex, 12, 13, 14, 15,000, fair warning, bang. Lot 2, and then we go back to pronunciation, Audemars, 6, 7, 8,000, last chance, it's with the commission bidder, bang. I'm like, gosh, the specialist must be bleeding, the consignor must be bleeding.
So what is the future of, so it's a 2-part question. What is the future of watch collecting? And specifically, what is the future of watch auctions?
Well, if I knew, I could sell my idea either to Mr. Drahi or Mr. Pino or to Phillips' shareholder. I don't really think anybody knows, and probably there are some answers for subdivisions of the market, either by price point, continent, or collecting style. Of course, digital has come big time in the last 16 months since the first lockdown, March 2020. Some auction houses were more ready than others, but I think by now everyone who wanted to migrate completely to digital could have done it. Anyone had a chance to develop their software or buy their software in the last 16 months. And I think it depends on the market segment. I think you will see a lot of digital online transactions happening, whether it's a timed auction, which is basically an eBay system, or live auctions with auctioneer phone bidding and previews and the ability to bid online, but you're just basically submitting your bids in a digital way. I think a lot of hybrid models will be around for the coming years. I regret to imagine that technology will one day be so good that the human touch is no longer necessary. I hope it happens after my retirement, so after 2040 or something. But listen, I'm told that today there are robots who do better eye surgery than doctors with their own hands. Well, I guess it could also happen to the watch auction industry.
Let's hope it doesn't. It's about people and it's about watches, and I think you have some job security for the future. So don't worry, Aurel.
Well, I love, and I have to say, despite of the amazing digital capabilities that Phillips has, and many people say this is the most amazing app in the world, and I've hardly ever used it myself, being on the rostrum or on the phone. All clients say what we appreciate at Phillips is the human touch. We're still sending the watches around the world, even during the pandemic, to the US, to the UK, to Asia. We were in Japan, we were in Taiwan, and we love engaging with collectors. And we're not just like, this is the call center. Hello, how can I help you? Where are you? I'm in Bombay. This is not Phillips. And I think as long as I'm here, and I think that shared the vision with the shareholder and the management, we want to remain the real people with the real face.
And by the way, call me a traditionalist. Thank you for continuing to print watch auction catalogs. There's something I love. It's a throwback. It's becoming retro, but it's such a useful tool when attending an auction or researching an auction.
Oh, here you touched on a very touchy subject, and I must be very careful what I say because we at Phillips had endless conversations about that topic. For sure, the awareness about the environment is much greater than it was 10 or 20 years ago. Whether you look at electric cars, your ecological footprint in general, how often you travel by plane or by car. And catalogs are, of course, part of this discussion. Now, what's quite amazing is that so many collectors complain, the other guys don't send me catalogs anymore. And I try to sort of knowing that it might also be on our side in a few years from now, trying to, give a balanced answer. And I only realized then how attached watch collectors are to that physical experience of turning page by page, taking notes, putting yellow Post-its, earmark the pages, travel with their catalogs after they've viewed the watches and reviewed their notes. And I say that quite openly. A lot of collectors said, can't see the watch, can't look it up in a catalog, no bidding with me. It happened. And not just small-time hobby collectors, serious senior citizens in our community. So it's a very, very challenging discussion. I'm sure it wasn't easy for anyone in this industry. We still print them, but maybe one day there's a digital product that is better, quicker, sweeter, and more comfortable to you and to the auction house. I don't know.
Auction catalogs, their days may be numbered, but as more recently, on behalf of collectability, I've been more of a buyer at auction. And I attended an auction and there was no catalog. I only had my iPhone as lot by lot was being sold. And it took the experience and lowered it, in my opinion, because you're staring at a phone to get those last minute details or that comfort to raise the paddle. The auctioneer sees people in the audience staring at their phones rather than a catalog, and it just kind of deflates the whole experience. I agree with you. Maybe someday we won't have catalogs, but I'm going to enjoy every last one we have in the meantime.
And I think you're right, and you're not definitely that old that I would call you a dinosaur, but just think, for example, of the sensual experience going to a fine restaurant and you get proper napkins, proper glasses, proper china, proper cutlery, a proper basket with bread, and not throw out plastic, throw out paper, throw out this. We came so far as mankind, as a culture, to celebrate these wonderful things. And yes, vintage or collector's watches are not a necessity. I get it. But art isn't a necessity. I mean, if you want to decorate the walls, just buy a poster, print it yourself. I'm sure there's great printing techniques these days. But this is part of culture, and we try to celebrate it as good as we can with those who wish to celebrate it with us.
Beautifully said. In our final minutes together today, I want to focus on Patek Philippe specifically. Once again, I think we could have another hour-long podcast or longer on this topic because this is what collectability is all about. We want to hear what you have to say because you are such a market leader. You're a tastemaker. And I'm just very curious what's on your mind today. What are the most exciting buying segments in the world of Patek Philippe? And it's open from vintage to modern, everything in between.
Well, first of all, seriously, are we already in the last minute? I just felt we started, but seriously about Patek Philippe. I think with the exception of two personal favorites of mine that I wear as my daily beaters, I'm not going to mention them now. There is nothing that at Patek Philippe is not an attractive proposition price-wise at this very moment. Now, you heard me. Instead of pointing at 1936 pocket watches and 1974 ellipses and 2001 annual calendars, I say everything is attractive to buy except two world-famous sports models that I love dearly. So I'm not bad-mouthing them. Why am I saying that? Well, overall, whether it's a 1518, a 1463, a nice Calatrava, the price evolution that some Ferraris, some Baskets, some Rolexes, some independents made in the last 10 years, actually, Patek Philippe was very humble, steady, but actually overall not spectacular, as in that I would be concerned it's overheated. Why is that? I think the last few years, we've seen a new generation of collectors come in, and they are young, dynamic, forward-thinking, and they have definitely been a little more casual than their fathers, probably more casual than you and I are, and they've been pushing many sort of very contemporary cutting-edge watches, but also vintage tool watches, sports watches that go so well with sneakers and hoodies to new heights. The classic 33, 34, 35, 36 millimeter vintage Patek Philippe, and that includes some of the all-time icons, like a 1518. Well, we've seen a great yellow one go from 420, 450, 480, 500, but not like some contemporary or vintage 400, 800, 1.2 million. So today I put my own money on nearly every single Patek pocket watch, wristwatch, vintage, contemporary, 3970s, 5970s, you name it, enamels. I mean, a great Susan Rohr, it was 15 years ago, $150,000. 150, 160, 170, 180, 200, 220, 250, 280. Well, if we're at 350 today, it's barely doubled. In the same time, 9 out of 10 independents and vintage tool watches quintupled. So Patek represents today really good value in the collecting market. Really good value.
That's beautifully said, and I couldn't agree more. But here's my follow-up question. Another pet peeve of mine is when people ask regarding a watch, is this a good investment? The question I bet you hear every day too. How do you answer that question, especially when someone's asking about an important Patek Philippe?
Yes, I do hear this question a lot. And in some instances, I said, I don't think you should buy any watch at all. But I then more politely explain why I think it's not reasonable to ask me about future performance. First, what do I know? Did I see a pandemic coming? I think last March, the Dow dropped 30%. So how can I foresee the watch market? Truth is that today we're often talking values for those you can buy a really nice motor car, sometimes even a semi-detached house, and sometimes even a proper house in Beverly Hills or elsewhere. And I think it's fair that people say, what's the value? What's today's market? And where do you think it's heading? That's different of where do I make the most? Because nobody works hard all their life, whether you're a doctor, a lawyer, or anything else, to buy a watch for 100,000, to realize that 6 months later it's worth 50, and 2 years later it's worth 20. I mean, that's like seeing your ice cream melt in the sun. Not good. But mostly I say the greatest dividend and reward you get from a watch or an artwork is if you buy it for 100,000, you enjoy it for 10 years and smile every time you look at it, drive it, wear it, and when you want to sell it, it's still 100,000. Okay, I get it. Inflation, 100,000 in 10 years isn't 100,000 today. But I'd like to see someone who will take me on an incredible vacation, and after the vacation, I still have my $50,000 in my pocket. No, it's gone. Or the most incredible 1982 Bordeaux that I can experience, taste, and enjoy, and at the end still have $2,000 in my pocket. You spent it. Watches are not consumed. They remain. Now, if they double in value, I'm so happy. But by the way, it's not even that funny, because how do I feel today about my $22,000 retail price Nautilus 5711 that I bought 10 years ago? I felt really good about it when it was a $22,000 watch. Today, I don't feel good about it anymore. So do we always want everything to double, triple, and quadruple? I think what we want is just to have that smile when you look at it on your wrist. Everything else is bonus, is whipped cream and sort of chocolate chips on top. If you want to speculate with money, go to the stock market. For everything else, John and I can help you.
Very, very nicely said. And I've been giving a lot of thought lately, speaking to collectors, some of which who asked that question about investment, of why people buy. And I hate to profile collectors, but I'm starting to think there are definitely different segments of collecting. In your long experience in this world, what types of collectors do you deal with mostly? And is there the ideal collector in your mind?
No, there is no ideal collector. I think as long as your motifs are serene, any kind of collector is a good collector. Whether you say, all that matters to me is the looks. Okay, so you're about the aesthetics. The other one collects every caliber a brand ever made. Another one wants every variant of a reference ever made. Fair enough. Another one wants only new old stock watches, double sealed, triple sealed. Okay, you're more like the stamp, the coin, and the butterfly collector. Every collector who has a serene interest is a collector. Now, some people call themselves collectors, go to a Patek Philippe boutique, get a green Nautilus, and flip it the next day for 150 or 200 profit. Not a collector. Others are only going to the shop saying, hi, I've got 50K spare. What watch should I buy to get the most likes on my Instagram? Not a collector. But I've heard it and I've seen it. Of course, you always also got those who go to the boutique, try on a watch, photograph it, then say, nah, sorry, not for me, and post it as, look what I've got. Mm-hmm. Not a collector. As long as you are here for the watch and for nothing else, you're a collector. And the best test is, think of, what was it called? The movie with Castaway, where the DHL guy...
yes.
Castaway, I think, where he's on a lonely island for 3 years, I believe, growing a long beard and eating fish and, building his own...
And playing with a soccer ball named Wilson.
Wilson, exactly. So, if you buy a watch and the moment you write the check or do the wire, you say, I'd take that watch with me on that island, that watch is good for you, and you bought it, the watch, and not the status, not the value, because it's for you. And imagine you're all by yourself. You don't get any likes. You don't get any, wow, cool dude around the table with your buddies. It's comfortable. You can wear it. You enjoy it. You can stare at it when you're bored alone and just say, wow, how did they do this satin finish? Or look at the blue shine of the dial. Or look how at midnight all the functions on the 31st of December jump simultaneously, better even on the 28th or 29th of February. That's when it's sincere. And whatever your reason is, if you personally, alone for yourself, love the watch, you're already like a watch guy.
I think those words are very real and from your heart. Thank you for saying that. And hopefully more collectors will think about that ahead of their next purchase. Aurel, there are many people who want to jump into the world of vintage, but they're afraid, rightfully so. What do you advise for the person looking for their very first Patek Philippe watch, the very first vintage Patek Philippe watch?
It shouldn't be considered advertising either for collectability or Phillips watches, but the first purchase, you should do it with a person of trust. Because I'm fully aware that the first purchase in a new area no one can be already the know everything, tick every box type of specialist. You can read a lot of blogs, you can read a lot of books, but you can just not go 0 to 60 and be now a vintage specialist who is fully protected in his armor against all type of polishing or retouching of dials or wrong restoration in the movement. So if you do not have yourself the knowledge, the most important thing is to go and find the person of trust. He or she can be a fellow collector. He or she can be a dealer, a watch journalist, an auction house specialist, a dealer, a consultant, an advisor, a museum curator, a employee of the manufacturer. It's unlimited what he or she can be. But listen, why do we have dentists? Because we were just no longer interested in putting our own teeth. Why do we go to lawyers? Because we just know the law is too complex to defend ourselves or to, protect ourselves in front of the law. And the watch market today is complex. The amounts of money are serious. And a good friend at your side who makes sure that you have only the best and sweetest memories from your first vintage watch person is doing you the biggest favor, because the first watch purchase is a little bit like the first kiss. You'll always remember it, and that first experience will define for the rest of your life how you feel about that.
In terms of rarity versus condition, and not only in buying the first watch, but as a collector grows and matures and buys more variety, which is more important to you? And how do you advise collectors when they're really struggling, finding that unique piece, but it might not be in the best condition, or buying something that's exceptional condition, but might not be so rare?
Oh, this is an excellent question, John, because this is coming up every season. I have collectors who call me and say, I'm looking for a perfect such and such. I'm like, excuse me, there's only 8 pieces of that in the world. Yeah, I know. Price is not an issue. I want it. Okay. Call them and say, I have one here. They loop it and they say, it's not perfect. It's only a 9.6 out of 10 on a fixture scale from 0 to 10, and 10 it would be mint. I'm like, yeah, but it's a 60-year-old watch. Yeah, but it's not good enough. I'm like, but there isn't a better one. So the call you have to make is, do you want the reference, the rare version, the rare dial, or you just want perfection? Because if you want perfection, you can just forget that reference will ever enter into your collection. Oh, that really S***. It's an eternal dilemma. Aesthetics, provenance, condition, originality, rarity, and of course the economics. There is sadly no such thing as a black dial stainless steel 1518 that belonged to Paul Newman, Newell stock for $100,000. You've got to cut one corner, and maybe it's the $30 or $40 million check you would have to write for that watch. As in cutting corner, meaning making a compromise and close your teeth and eyes, bite in your teeth, and just go forward.
And that treasure hunt for finding the perfect watch and making these balanced decisions is what makes this so much fun.
That's exactly the point. You have to make balanced decision. There has to be an equilibrium between all the parameters that matter to you as a collector. Sometimes it's size, sometimes it's the patina, sometimes the degree of polishing, sometimes the price that you just have to swallow the bitter pill and pay an extra 10-20% to get your dream watch. That I always advise you to do. The 10 or 20%, you'll forget them very quickly. But your favorite watch is likely going to give you for years and decades satisfaction. It takes time to get there. I wasn't born with that sort of wisdom in a big spoon. I had to learn it myself, not just with watches, sometimes chasing my favorite vintage car and losing it for $5,000. I'm like, gosh, if I think of what I did with those $5,000 instead, a sweater, a dinner party, a quick weekend, this and that, all gone, but that favorite piece of mine is also gone. So to be greedy at the wrong time is really not a good idea. But be educated and determined, focused. That's very important.
As we are now in the heart of summer, I think for most people, they think of exotic vacations, time with family, little relaxation, a nice bottle of wine. But for those in the auction world, they're thinking about deadlines and the fall sales, because now is the time where decisions are made of what's included in the sale, what the top lots will be. The negotiations are being had behind closed doors. The hunt around the world is nonstop. So as you're preparing for this next set of the fall auctions, have you changed the way that you curate an auction, especially in this post-pandemic universe that we all now live in? And what are you doing differently? And can you share a few tidbits about what we might expect in the fall?
Again, so good questions. The first and most important thing everyone here should know: curate an auction. Yes, you can curate an auction, but you cannot create an auction. I cannot sit down and say, okay, I want a yellow 24.99, tick. I want a Susan Rohr, tick. I want a Stardale Rolex, tick. I want an FP Journe Tourbillon, tick. I want a Richard Mille ceramic, tick. Here's my favorite auction. No, we can only cook with the ingredients that the market offers us. And if one season nobody offers me a 24.99, I don't have one, period. Sometimes people offer us second or third quality 24.99s, and the best curation advice is, in doubt, don't take it. Sadly, not everybody adheres to that thought, but to bring mediocre to poor watches to the market, you're not doing yourself a favor, you're not doing the market a favor, and you're not doing the consignor a favor. Better not have it than have it kind of average and lukewarm. Less is more is definitely something at Phillips we've kind of invented. I remember in my old years, and I can pull out catalogs here in my office, with over 500 watches in a one-day auction. I was myself 8 hours, 10 hours on the rostrum, flat out from 10 a.m. till 6 p.m. in Hong Kong, in Geneva. Today, we are really suffering if we have more than 200 watches, because the amount of time that goes into each watch and each client, and we have the largest watch team in the world, but 25 watch specialists. We sold the spring season, I think, 600 watches. We were busy looking after each watch and each client. How can the same size team do the same quality job with 1,500 watches? Well, either they have 36 hours a day, I'd love to have that too, or there's just something less at some point in the process. So less is more. That's another sort of curating advice I can give. And eventually have the courage to say no when people offer you duplications. I've seen auctions where in the same catalog there are two 24.99s, three 1463s, 370, 3974s. I mean, whom do you do a favor with that? Other your short-term P&L. And we are often delaying important watches simply because I don't think it's fair that two watches are cannibalizing each other, and therefore, sometimes sacrifice a great watch so that the focus of the market and the energy of the market and the attention of the market can focus at one type of watch. And this is how you probably balance it out. I always insist to have $1,000, $2,000, $5,000 entry watches. We need a steel Datejust. We need a steel and gold GMT. We need an Phillips. We need a Memo Box. We need a Speedmaster, and then hopefully all the way to the treasures and the museum quality pieces.
Are you finding this summer especially busy?
I am super busy because since many parts of Europe have now, most people had their two shots, travel is again possible. And I've had to catch up June and May a lot, what I haven't done the 12 months before, long due visits and examine watches in person. Clients that waited for a year to eventually meet in person. So terribly busy at this moment. The Geneva watch auction is shaping up quite nicely, I must say, but traditionally we started collecting watches after the summer break. Now, literally, the business getting, which is kind of not a polite word, but the business getting process starts the day you've closed your previous auction, which in this instance means March. It's a little bit like, I think a politician once said it, campaigning starts the first day after you won the election, because the next one is coming in 4 years. So we started in March and have already a number of super, super nice, fresh to the market, never seen before, really sort of untouched highlights. Very nice stuff to come. You will be excited, especially as a Patek lover, you will be excited. Also, those collecting independents will be thrilled.
That is such a teaser. Unfortunately, that's going to be the teaser that's going to wrap up this incredible interview. Your vision, your hard work, your leadership, I think really came through in these minutes we've spent together. And I really appreciate the time for you to speak openly with the collectability audience. Are there any parting words you'd like to leave for everyone as we wrap up this podcast?
Well, you've been an incredible host. Thanks so much, John. You obviously made me feel so comfortable, even too comfortable, that probably will later regret how outspoken and politically incorrect I was at times. I'd like to apologize to you and to anyone who sometimes felt when I said S*** that I was not polite. No, I think the most beautiful parting words or the most important parting words I can think of is, we all came to this wonderful place out of love, passion, interest. Interest is probably more intellectual. Love and passion goes a little bit more deep down your body, where your heart and soul is. And that's what it should be all about. I know dollar signs are behind each transaction. I know there's competition out there on a professional level, but amongst collectors. But never forget the fun part. Never forget the camaraderie that I think is a reason why so many came to this place in the first instance and want to stay later, even though maybe they've satisfied themselves with all the watches they can possibly ever buy. So let's keep that fun stimulation, whether it's intellectual or emotional, alive as long as possible, and keep it a clean, pure, honest place so that also future generations can enjoy this as much as we do.
Thank you, Aurel. Unforgettable discussion. And thank you all for listening to this most recent episode in our Collectability podcast series. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please like and subscribe. And remember to follow us on any podcast player you enjoy using in order to not miss any future recordings. Thank you very much for listening. This is John Reardon for Collectability.